Please welcome Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg.
Good afternoon, and thank you. What a pleasure and what a privilege it is to be here for this occasion. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I want to thank again Administrator Carnahan and the team at GSA for co-hosting this event. I want to thank all of our distinguished guests. When you take office, when the President asks you to serve as Secretary of Transportation, you quickly come to understand two things. One, the weight of the responsibility to look after our transportation systems and the safe movement of people and goods. And second, the extent to which you are standing on the shoulders of those who have built up this department before you. And it's been a great privilege just earlier today to break bread with my predecessors, secretaries. Thanks for your service. Thanks for being here. It's a great honor to be with Attorney General Garland. Thank you for joining us. With all of our colleagues at USDOT, leaders from the House and the Senate, and of course, most importantly, the families of Secretaries Coleman and Mineta. I want to thank them for sharing Secretaries Coleman and Mineta with the country, as well as for being with us today as we mark their legacies. And while we know that Denny Mineta and Bill Coleman III were unable to be here, we know that they are following us, and I join everyone else in wishing them a swift and full recovery. This building, which Administrator Carnahan shared a little bit about, is an extraordinary headquarters for the DOT. It has many features that serve us so well: a wonderful location, modern technology, an abundance of natural light that I think it's fair to say is the envy of many of our sister agencies. Even subtle architectural puns, like the grid beneath your feet, or the tiles on the wall here, commonly known as subway tiles. Get it? So many wonderful things about this headquarters, but what it has not had until now is a name that calls us to remember and honor the importance of the mission of this agency and the tradition of those who have led it, a name that fits the past, present, and future of this institution, a name that guides us in living up to values like trust, excellence, imagination, empathy, and fairness. Now it will. Even though they served years apart from each other, Secretary Coleman and Secretary Mineta share a number of distinctions, some of which were remarked on earlier in this program. They were both veterans of our armed services. During World War II, a young Bill Coleman joined the Army Air Forces, training with the aviators who became the Tuskegee Airmen, while young Norm Mineta served for 3 years as an Army intelligence officer in Japan and Korea. They also both practiced as well as preached the kind of bipartisanship we wish we saw more of today, but which I think we are all glad of the fact is more present in transportation than perhaps any other area of domestic policy. Secretary Coleman, a Republican who served under Gerald Ford and then received the Presidential Medal of Honor from President Clinton. Secretary Mineta, a Democrat who served under and then received that same great honor from President Bush. By the way, the only two transportation secretaries to receive our nation's highest civilian honor. And though each was born at a time when this country treated them as second-class citizens, they devoted their lives to the service of this country and its people and served in the very highest ways. A descendant of teachers, ministers, and social workers, even an underground railroad operator, Bill Coleman grew up attending a segregated elementary school, was one of only 7 black students at his high school, where he was suspended after demanding to join the all-white swim team, which chose to disband rather than admit him. After graduating from Penn and Harvard Law School at the top of his class, he became the first black Supreme Court clerk in U.S. history and was later personally recruited by Thurgood Marshall to join the legal team for Brown v. Board, which of course overturned the shameful separate but equal doctrine and outlawed the segregated schools of the very kind that he had attended as a child. He later served as president of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, arguing a total of 19 cases before the Supreme Court, winning a number of landmark civil rights victories that helped enshrine some of the most fundamental freedoms we enjoy today. During his tenure at DOT, Secretary Coleman established the Materials Transportation Bureau, the precursor to what we now know as PHMSA, opened NHTSA's test lab in East Liberty, Ohio, which has conducted cutting-edge, life-saving research ever since, authored the first comprehensive national transportation policy. He also made it possible for the Concorde, the world's first supersonic commercial flight, to access the U.S. and approved transformative mega projects whose legacy guides us today in our work on the bipartisan infrastructure law. As President Clinton said when he awarded Secretary Coleman the Medal of Freedom, in the courtroom, in the boardroom, and the halls of power, Bill Coleman has put his brilliant legal intellect in the service of our country. If you're looking for an example of the consistency, discipline, devotion to the things that make this country a great place, you have no further to look than William T. Coleman, Jr. The life of Norm Mineta was in many ways shaped by his powerful responses to the great tragedies of American history. Right now, in May, we are in the midst of celebrating Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, honoring the innumerable contributions of AANHPI communities to every aspect of American society. But when Secretary Mineta was born, in San Jose in 1931, his immigrant parents were barred from becoming citizens by the Asian Exclusion Act. After the attacks on Pearl Harbor, he spent his childhood in a Japanese internment camp in the Wyoming desert, where inmates performed forced labor and lived in terrible conditions. Yet rather than losing faith in his country after how it treated him because of his race, the future Secretary Mineta devoted his life to serving this country in uniform, in local government, in Congress, and ultimately in the cabinet. During that time in Congress, he helped to craft some of the most defining legislation of the last century, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Liberties Act, the first official apology for the grave injustice of Japanese internment. And he also helped to author the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991, which reshaped how this government approaches transportation funding, and in so many ways laid the foundation for the historic infrastructure law that we're working to deliver today under President Biden's leadership. As Secretary of Transportation, Norm Mineta, of course, steered this department through its darkest days. On September 11th, he acted decisively to ground over 18,000 flights, and in the months that followed, oversaw in the creation of the TSA the largest mobilization of a new federal agency since World War II. And along the way, took a strong stand against anti-Muslim hate, reminding people of the anti-Japanese discrimination that he had lived through after Pearl Harbor. As the longest-serving transportation secretary in history, Secretary Mineta left an indelible mark on this department. And even now, decades later, I often encounter people from presidential appointees to building maintenance support staff who speak so warmly about him as a leader, a colleague, a mentor, and a friend. All of us are so much better off for the contributions he made over his lifetime devoted to public service. Fittingly, we are honoring these leaders during Public Service Recognition Week, as their legacies are such powerful examples to all who aspire to service. Growing up in the eras that they did, witnessing the injustices that they saw, rather than respond by indulging in cynicism, they responded by engaging in service. And in doing so, set out a template for the rest of us. The knowledge that the best way to help perfect our union, to contribute to that bending of the moral arc of history, is to commit yourself to making this country better than it was. Each of them understood that we are put on this earth not merely to be here, but to make others better off. I'm inspired by their example, grateful for their contributions, honored to celebrate their extraordinary legacies together with all of you right here in what is now to be the William T. Coleman Jr. and Norman Y. Mineta Federal Building. And again, we are so fortunate to have their families here after hearing your compelling accounts, having already been inspired to emulate Secretaries Coleman and Mineta in the stewardship of the important work of this department. I'm now equally motivated to emulate them when looking after the moral and personal growth of my son and daughter. You are a credit as well to their legacy. And so now let me ask Hardin Coleman and David Mineta to join me in making it official.